Hello and welcome to this presentation on open source data platforms for sustainable development goals with an overview of the Open SDG project. I'm Phil Ashlock and I'm supporting Callie Kong and the Office of the Chief Statistician for the US government. So I'm going to start off by talking about the US National Reporting Platform and some of its history and how it came to evolve into the Open SDG project. So starting about 5 years ago, we were looking at possible tools and platforms to create the U.S. National Reporting Platform. And at the time, the city of Philadelphia had put out this Community Health Explorer project, which had a number of the same kinds of features that we were looking for in a national reporting platform, with data visualization, breakdown of indicators, and really some opportunities to really get into the data and display it in a user-friendly way. And it was built on some open source components that we were already familiar with, and my office with data.gov was already using. So that included the GitHub open source collaboration platform, the Jekyll static site generator, and a number of other components. So pretty quickly we started to look at prototyping with a copy of the Philadelphia codebase and using it for the SDG data. So it didn't take too much effort to pull in the metadata and start working with some simple spreadsheet data files. So this prototype came out, and it was useful in how it allowed us to kind of combine the platform for managing the data and publishing the data. So you can see with this view, you actually have some of the buttons for editing the data and the metadata, which then provides a user interface similar to like Microsoft Excel for updating and adding data just through simple CSV spreadsheet files, as well as editing some of the metadata and the content. And we really liked this prototype and what it offered, not just in terms of the utility of what the tools offered, but also some of the open source principles and the process behind it. So just as an overview of some of the common kind of open source principles, the fact that it was something that was open and available for reuse, right? This started with something from the city of Philadelphia, that it was transparent public code and data and content, and especially through that GitHub platform that was free to customize. It was part of this kind of collaborative development process. There's already a community around some of these components, and it allowed us to build a community and allowed us to sort of think about owning the platform and really having control over it, and also just leveraging our local developer and sort of capacity for maintaining it, as well as having sort of the key concepts of an agile open source development process kind of baked into it, particularly through the way that it was using the Jekyll open source collaboration platform and some of those other open source components. And there are a couple of advantages about this tool, this platform, and the architecture of the static site that the Jekyll tool provides that are somewhat unique to some of the considerations and requirements we have in the government environment. So it does really help simplify the security and compliance process for managing a website and a tool like this. It's just a much simpler and lower risk underlying architecture, and that also means it's costs a lot less and has much simpler kind of operations and maintenance around it. And then there's just a number of other advantages around sort of using this kind of open source tool and environment. Allows us to kind of have more collaboration, work with existing communities, again, have this more sort of transparent process around it, and kind of really leverage the modular components and kind of the customizability and extensibility of it. And the whole process of maintaining the data and the content with this platform is really leveraging a lot of the process and the features that an open source collaboration platform like GitHub already offers. So you can see just the process of updating data is something where there's a whole process for managing the update process. In this case, you're asking someone to review the update and to accept it. It allows us to sort of see the changes in the data over time, sort of get a version history, and really sort of look at the history of changes to the data and the metadata over time. And this idea of collaboration was really key to what made this tool, this platform work so well. So partly the fact that the GitHub collaboration platform was already widely used within government. It was actually something that's often used for collaboration between different agencies, even on things that aren't open source projects that are more around content and authoring documents. So that the fact that we knew that we could already use that to help facilitate collaboration among all the different statistical agencies was really helpful. It meant that we didn't have to get some new tool approved. But all these same concepts also meant that this tool and this platform is something that lent itself to collaboration, beyond just our use for the U.S. National Reporting Platform, and fortunately really aligned with a lot of the kind of principles and guidelines for creating these SDG platforms. So just highlighting some of the principles that came out of the Cape Town Global Action Plan in I think it was 2017, and some of the more detailed principles that came out of the sort of guidelines and recommendations that were developed in 2018. So just highlighting some of these kind of aligned with a lot of the same principles that I already went over around this open source platform. And also very quickly we realized that there would be other countries that would be interested in repurposing and copying our copy of the platform, and the GitHub open source platform makes it really easy to create copies and forks. So that's what the UK government did. Not too long after we put together our first prototype, and very quickly they started developing additional features which we were then able to benefit from as well. So just looking at this screenshot of that same 1-to-1 indicator that I had a screenshot from the previous, from the initial prototype, you can already see a number of additional features here that were added by the UK government, including sort of better design and layout. So it allowed us to do disaggregation of data, sort of better, more feature-rich data visualization capabilities, and a search feature. And we also worked on multilingual support. The UK also did a lot of work around accessibility features to make it more usable. And so this is an example of the high contrast mode, in addition to a lot of other accessibility features that were added under the hood. And as I mentioned before, a lot of work on facilitating sort of more disaggregation capabilities for the data, and even some map capabilities. So the UK, the Office of National Statistics, really did a lot of work to improve the platform, and over the years, with the help of other organizations like the Center for Open Data Enterprise, this project ultimately developed into this open source project called Open SDG, which is now gotten to an official 1.0 release with additional versions and updates even beyond that. We're still catching up actually with the US version. There's now a website where this open source project is more packaged for readily available reuse with documentation and case studies and things like that. So the documentation website has a lot in there, including, as I mentioned, a number of country-specific case studies on sort of how they've customized it and used it for their unique national context. And there's a number of features in addition to a lot of things that I already mentioned. I think customizability is perhaps one of the most significant facets of what makes this tool so useful for many different people. And not to get into the technical details too much, but this diagram from the documentation website kind of helps illustrate some of the flexibility and customizability of the platform. So this diagram kind of breaks down the ways that you want to manage and prepare the data. And there's a couple different ways you can do that. So in the US and the UK, a lot of that initial work just started off by working with simple CSV files, spreadsheet files. But there's now been sort of work to better facilitate pulling in data from other data sources, including SDMX, and working with metadata in different formats as well. So there's kind of different options and flexibility around how the data is pulled in and maintained in the platform. And then that's coupled with sort of how you manage the site itself. So actually, if you were to set up your own instance, usually there is the sort of core site repository that you set up, and then you would set up a separate data repository, or you would have other options for how you're working with the data. So flexible data handling is really one of the, I think, really significant, useful considerations of the Open SDG platform. Just to get into a little bit more detail about sort of what's possible now and in development. There's a couple different formats for facilitating the input and the output. So there's been some initial work on not just supporting the CSV input process like we've typically used, but also being able to pull in SDMX data, as well as different options for pulling in the metadata. And then a number of different output options are kind of baked in as well. And there's work on doing more to support SDMX output, although that requires a little bit more intimate knowledge of mapping your internal data to the SDMX, DSD, things like that. And just some examples of some of the flexibility and capabilities around the data export, things like that. So these are some examples for the UK platform. And the way that the Open SDG project is kind of broken up into the repository for managing the site and then the separate repository for managing the data. There's now also some sort of new features that are baked into the data side of the project repository, where you kind of get a developer landing page that gives you a lot of these different options for exporting the data in different formats. So that's a general overview of the project. There's a number of different countries that have already started working with this code base and customizing it for their needs, and really using it as their official national reporting platform. A number of other countries that are in various stages of exploring it. So I think this is a pretty current list of the countries that we're aware of, and there's a list of sort of more developed case studies and links to different countries using it on the documentation website. So we're not alone anymore. There's a real sort of growing community of different countries using this project now, and it's really as a result of some really incredible collaboration and contribution from a number of different people. So not to list every single person, but obviously thanking sort of the origins of this open source code base from the city of Philadelphia, and then the initial work from my office and the Office of the Chief Statistician in the U.S., Callie Kong and Jen Park, and then the great people in the UK Office of National Statistics, Anne and Lucy, Phil, the whole team over there, and then the Center of Open Data Enterprise, which has been a huge supporter of this project, helped bring on Brock Fanning, who's the kind of key developer and has really taken this project and really turned it into a robust open source project and not just these two examples from these two different countries. And there's also been some great contributions from the World Bank and the UN Statistical Division, including some of the recent work on having more sort of robust capabilities around translations and multilingual support. And there's a number of other contributors who I don't know how listed here, but I think it's been great to see code contributions from other countries. I think Germany has contributed a little bit to the code base as well now. So thanks to everyone who has really made this into more of a robust project that everyone can leverage. And just to list the websites and the resources where you can learn more about it, get the documentation, see case studies and examples. So these are the main links. And I think that's it. Thank you.